Okay, with that said, people, we're going to go on a tangent. So if you want lunchtime commentary of the trial, Legal Bites, Rakeda, Emily D. Baker, and many others. Right now, I've got the leader of the Conservative Party of Quebec on, and we're going to talk Quebec politics so that people can learn about what's going on in Quebec. Eric, I'm bringing you in. 3, 2, 1. Sir, how goes the battle?
Yeah, good. How are you? Look, I'm just
good.
gonna fix the image so you see me better. Then you
Yeah,
go.
that's perfect. I like it. And now let me make sure. Chat, let me know if the audio is good. This is going to be such a wild break from what we're currently live streaming, which is the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial. We're going to go from the cesspool of Hollywood to Quebec, and I don't want to say it's a cesspool of Quebec. It just hasn't been the freest, most democratic of provinces for the last 2.5 years. Eric, a lot of people watching are not going to know who you are. Elevator pitch, just to explain who you are before we start talking, substantive issues.
Well, I've been elected leader of the Conservative Party of Quebec a year ago, almost on April 17th, so a little bit more than a year. I was formerly a radio host here in Quebec City for a decade. I've been involved in conservative politics for ages with the ADQ, with Mario Dumont at the National Assembly or at the federal level, with Stockwell Day mainly, with the Canadian Alliance in the good old days, or with Harper a bit, and even the Bloc Québécois. I had kind of a separatist twist when I was young, and I've also so over the last year, people are wondering like, is there a conservative party in Quebec? Yes, there is. There used to be actually a long time ago. We had 8 premiers in Quebec who were conservative at the beginning, but the Conservative Party disappeared of Quebec for over 85 years. And we reappeared at the National Assembly last year when I convinced a CAQ member to cross over to us, Claire Sanson in Iberville. And now we're represented for the first time. We're going up with all the figures. We went from 500 members a year ago to 58,000 members currently. We went from 0 or 1% in the polls to somewhere between 14 and 20% right now. We are the party that has the biggest amount of donors in Quebec in this year. And all the indicators are positive for us. We're on an upswing. We could say that easily. And the main reason behind that is because I think we became the only party to talk about freedom and liberty here in Quebec. We've been doing it during the crisis, and that's why I came back in politics, because I couldn't believe that 125 members in the National Assembly were all against my opinions. And I didn't know who I would have voted for. So I decided, well, look, if there's nobody on the ballot that I could vote for, why don't I put my name? And and the rest is history.
Well, people saying I'm astonished to hear that there's a conservative party in Quebec, and I'll tell you quite honestly, I don't even think that I knew. I knew just roughly because people were saying, "Hey, you got to talk to Eric Duhaime," given what I had been protesting against for the last 2.5 years. But I didn't know either. And I looked it up, and so the Conservative Party started in 2009, from what I could see online. And then what happened from 2009 to 2020?
Well, the party was at 1%, and they didn't even have full slates of candidates during elections, and it was a small party. As I said, they had 500 members, so it was a very small party. But fortunately, because we have so many people around now, we're becoming a great party. I've even been invited, David, for the 2 leaders debate that there's going to be during the election campaign. That's crucial. It's very important during an election campaign to be around the table when there's the huge debate. And I've already been invited by French CBC, Radio-Canada, and TVA. So that's also a very good news, I think, for small C conservatives in Quebec.
And then explain what the party is, because now some people might look at a Conservative Party of Quebec and say it's a Liberal Party of Canada. I mean, what does being conservative look like?
Well, yeah, you have to understand that personally, I come from the Libertarian wing of the conservative movement in Canada. I've always been. I'm the first openly gay leader of a conservative party provincially and federally in Canada's history. So I'm not into social conservatism. I'm a fiscal conservative. I'm a libertarian. And the reason why I came back in politics is because our individual freedoms, our civic rights, our democracy have been put aside for way too long. I never, ever thought that in Quebec I wouldn't be able to have dinner with my mom, or that they would forbid me to go to my own cottage, or that the people would be fired because they don't want to inject something in their body, and that we would have to show papers to go in a restaurant to have a meal. Uh, I've never ever thought that Quebec would go that bad, and I couldn't accept that as an individual, as a human being, and that's why I decided to create that coalition of people. And it did work. It seemed, for me, it was my hope. I didn't do it because I'm a good person. I did it because it was for me the way to get through that crisis, to see a light at the end of the tunnel, and it was very important that we had hope that things could change, and that's why now we have a clear alternative to turn things around in Quebec.
So started 2009 and had, let's not to be mean, it had no support, virtually no existence, but now it's started picking up. What are the policies of the Conservative Party? I guess, well, actually, what are the policies? What's the platform?
Well, we are conservative. Like I think we can put us on the center right of the political spectrum. We do believe, for example, like the healthcare system needs to be fixed, because one of the reasons why Quebec went so bad during the crisis is because our healthcare system was not able to support anything. It was too fragile, too inefficient, and so we want to make sure that there is competition, that it's decentralized, but also that we add the contribution of the private sector to our healthcare system. I know it's something that is controversial in English Canada, but for us it's very important. It's the only way we can see to fix our system. Another example is that we want to develop our own resources. We think that gas and oil need to be exploited. Quebec is rich in gas and oil, but unfortunately we've banned the exploitation of it in Quebec for way too long. And with what's going on right now in Ukraine, I think that Quebec should become more independent in matter of energy, and we should also help our allies in Europe by sending them our own natural gas that is much better for the environment than what they're doing right now by transforming the different fuels. And other than that, we also want to give more freedom of choice. I think that what unites us in the party is freedom of choice. I think that if we have to summarize it, we want to give more freedom of choice for education of your kids, for example, by making sure that you get a check for the kindergarten instead of having a public monopoly where you wait in queues for ages. We want also to have freedom of choice for patients to go to a private or a public hospital, for example. We want also more freedom of choice for taxpayers. We think that workers should keep more money in their wallet and do what they want with their money instead of the government doing what they want with their money. And we also want to respect the rights of the people. We want to amend the law on public health that has put us for 2 years in an emergency crisis that doesn't exist anymore, but they're renewing it every single week for 112 weeks now we're talking about. So these are the kinds of things that conservatives in Quebec stand for.
Okay, and I'll break this down subject by subject.
Yeah.
Some people may be more or less interested in this, but let's start with the healthcare system.
Yeah.
In theory, it's province by province. It's under the provincial jurisdiction.
Absolutely.
In reality, one of the arguments is that it's effectively under federal control, and that the federal government will dictate who gets what based on who does what, which is effectively indirect control from the federal government. I mean, what would be one way of actually concretely regaining provincial autonomy over the healthcare system?
Yeah, you're right. There's a barrier, which is called the Canadian Health Act, that deprives us from having the right to charge patients in Quebec or in any province, actually, without being penalized by the federal government in their transfer payments. We don't want to go there. We want to make sure that, healthcare remains free. The thing is that you can also have an insurance if you want to add up. But also that the private sector could compete with the public sector. And the models we're using are a lot of countries in Europe are working this way. I went personally to Sweden. I went in Stockholm and saw hospitals next to each other. One is public, one is private. And when the public sector, is not able to make sure that you get your treatment in a reasonable time, you can go to the private clinic, and the public sector is going to pay for it. We pay for an insurance. We don't pay for having a public monopoly that needs to be delivered where its services need to be delivered by the public sector. We pay for an insurance. When you pay your insurance company for your car, it doesn't mean that the insurance company needs to provide you a new car if you have an accident. It means that the insurance is going to cover the cost that it's going to, that is involved, that they're going to buy you a new car at any kind of dealer, and they're competing against each other. This is exactly what we want to do for the healthcare system. In education, it works well. We have in Quebec a public, private, both. We have public and private schools. They're competing against each other. The government is paying a huge chunk of private schools, and I think that if now parents have more choice in education, it's because the private sector has been putting a lot of pressure with different programs and to be more answering the demands of the parents. And that's what's been the problem with our monopoly right now in matter of healthcare. There's no pressure to make sure that we fix the system, so we need to put some competition within the system.
Well, we're gonna get to how that dovetails or merges with the crisis. But one of the arguments, to play the devil's advocate, is that if you go with this sort of more of a hybrid private public, you take doctors out of the public system who are necessarily going to go work in the private sector, and so you're taking resources from the public to go private, which is going to harm those who rely on the public system to the benefit of those who have the money to pay for the private. What's the response to that?
It's partly true what you're saying, and that's why there's three things we want to do. We want to make sure that, because currently if somebody wants to go in the private sector, he cannot get a penny from the public sector. So we're going to permit physicians to work in both systems at the same time, because that there's physicians, because there's no nurses, or because the budget for the year has been is not there anymore, it's over, they can't work. I mean, many of them don't work 100% because of that. So first off, we're going to make sure that they have the right legally to work on the private and in the public sector. Another thing we want to do is to increase the number of physicians in Quebec. We want to make sure that our universities are allowing more people to get in, because it's currently controlled, of course. So we want to make sure that we increase we're talking about 2,000 to 3,000 new physicians. But obviously, that's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take between 7 and 10 years before we reach that peak. And Quebec has a huge demand because, as you know, our population is aging, which means that we have more and more demand for healthcare services. And the third thing we need to do is to recognize more foreign students who come here and are physicians, and we don't recognize their qualifications. We need to make sure that we're updating that. Quebec is one of the most protectionist places for those people. There's a lot of physicians all around the world who would love to come here and practice. I'm not saying that we should admit anyone and not control the quality of their education, but we need at least to open up our minds and make sure that we test them, and if they're good enough, then we should hire them as well.
Okay, well, I'm going to ask you the obvious question, because it's, saying we bring in 2,000 to 3,000 doctors, it's easy to say, but it's going to cost money. Where does that money come from? And then I'm going to ask you about the current breakdown as it is.
It's going to cost money, yes and no, because as soon as you open up the private sector, there's a part, obviously, that the state doesn't have to pay anymore. There's queues that are going to be smaller, so the pressure on the system is going to be lower. So we do believe that it's going to create, the private sector is going to absorb those physicians and is going to pay for them. So there's no, it's not going to cost more, because what's going to cost more, and you're right, it's the education, because the education of physicians is expensive, as we know, but 2,000-3,000 students, I think we can afford it.
Yeah, it's interesting. If they go private, people pay for it, so it doesn't come out of the government coffers. The question, I mean, and the argument, one of the responses I often hear, and it makes sense, and you'll tell me if it doesn't, is that if you open up private, okay, fine, some of the doctors go from public to private, but I guess there'd be a way to make sure that they have to allocate their time proportionately to not leave the public high and dry. But for every space that gets filled up in private for those who have the means, is that not also a freed up space in the public system? Exactly. Where those who have the money can pay for it, and those who don't, they have an extra seat now, or one less waiting person in the waiting room?
Absolutely. And there's also the insurance company. The people are saying, oh, it's going to create a two-tier system. It's not going to create a two-tier system. What's going to happen is that, first off, everybody's going to be taken care of. The queues might be much smaller, as you rightly pointed out. And the insurance, it's not that expensive. The workers, many companies will pay, because companies are losing money when you're waiting in a queue for a year because you're injured and they can't fix it during that time. So there's also a huge cost of having an inefficient system like we have right now. So it's not obvious that the private sector is not going to be able to put much more money into the system, and the insurance company cover up for the increased costs.
Okay, now for everyone out there who's American watching this, this is something I always say. We say Canada has free healthcare. It's so wonderful. It's free. You go, you don't have to show anything. You don't
You
have
have
to
to
pay.
wait. Yeah.
Well, but hold on. But you have to wait. But you do pay. Someone pays somewhere. So what is the percentage of the Quebec budget that's dedicated to healthcare?
Yeah, it's very interesting. Just to give you, I know the figures don't mean anything for Americans because you have a much larger population, but for us, it's $1 billion per week, which is a lot for the size of our economy. Just to give you an example, it's about 50% of the money that we send to our provincial government. 50% goes to cover the cost for the healthcare system right now, and it keeps booming. And because our demographics are that our population is aging fast, we're one of the fasting aging population on Earth. So it means that the costs are going to boom, because, as you know, when you're 70 or 80 years old, that's when the costs for healthcare are increasing tremendously. So the current system is not sustainable. And not only is it very costly, but the queues to wait are also very, very costly. We never talk about people dying because they didn't have the surgery they needed. And we don't talk about the people who are suffering because they can't meet a physician. We don't talk about 1/3 of Quebecers who don't even have a family doctor for their family. We never talk about those things. We always talk about in Canada, oh, you have a universal healthcare system. You're so lucky. It's so great. It's free. It's so democratic. It's so human. Well, unfortunately, it's a Sovietic model, and it just doesn't work. And so that's the problem we have right now in Canada. We're suffering because of that system.
So I want to make sure I understand this. That's to say 50% of federal funds allocated
Provincial of all the taxes we pay, because Americans have to understand the biggest amount of taxes we pay in Canada, and we pay much more than you, and we pay close to 50%, depending of our revenues in taxes, in income taxes in Canada. And 50% of the amount that we send to the provincial government, the government of Quebec, which is the biggest government in terms of spending in Quebec, because it's as David said, it's a provincial jurisdiction. Well, 50% of the spending of the Quebec government in all the programs is on healthcare. So it gives you an idea. And all the rest, you have the justice, the roads, the education, the like all the other services that the state, the debt, everything, all the other services that the government has to provide is 50%, but half of it just healthcare.
So because I always try to phrase it in a way that people can appreciate, but is that to say, hypothetically, I pay $100,000 in taxes. Conceptually, $50,000 a year of that $100,000 that I pay in a year goes to the healthcare system,
That's
whether
correct.
I use it or not.
That's correct.
And then when I have to use it, sometimes you have to wait to see. I mean, went to see a sleep apnea doctor. It took I got a call a year after the appointment. I forgot that I had the requisition, and I didn't end up going. But okay, so people can appreciate that if you pay less tax, well, the healthcare system costs an arm and a leg in the States, but you're paying either on the front end or the back end.
There's no
And the
such
question
thing
is,
as a free lunch.
yeah, and that's it. And for what you're paying, where are you getting better service? People are not that I know of. They're not rushing up to Quebec to get.
No.
They're going from Quebec to the Mayo Clinic to pay out the wazoo to get at least decent treatment. And Eric, okay, look, it's not a conspiracy theory in the sense that I'm not, it's just like when you look back at the COVID response, the reason for which we were locked down, stripped of our civil rights and liberties, the reason was 2 weeks to flatten the curve so as not to overwhelm the healthcare facility because it's unable to deal with this.
Yeah.
I mean, how long has the healthcare system been unable to deal with seasonal flus or serious?
No, but the healthcare system in Quebec has been broken for ages. It's just that the crisis put the spotlight on it, and now we're talking about it. But it's nothing new. Our healthcare system has not been good for decades in Quebec, and now we're talking about it because we had to turn around and look at hospitals and cases, and we saw that the waiting lists were getting out of control. And but all those things did happen before COVID. I mean, and when you look at the numbers they were talking about at the beginning of the crisis, they were saying like we would get like thousands and thousands of people in hospitals and everything. All those figures, I've never been there. And worse than that, the way they were calculating people, and still as we speak, they're calculating people who are in hospitals, you know, has no scientific ground, because no matter if you are there because you have COVID or because you went for any other reason, if you are positive, you're considered a COVID person in a
Mhm.
hospital, and it's up to 50% of people who are there who are not there because they have COVID. Some of them didn't even know they had COVID when they were there. They did never any have had any symptoms, but they're considered patients, COVID patients in our hospitals. The same thing with people dying, actually. Many people, because they were in a senior's house, because there was a case of COVID and they died during the same period of time, they're considered a patient who died from COVID. It's going to take a few years before we can look at the curves and compare and realize what were the real figures, because the figures that we've been given from the beginning of the crisis have been ballooned by the methodology of how they calculate the cases.
And I'm trying to pull up a tweet of, oh, here we go. Here we go. I'm gonna see if I can pull this up just to share it, because also people should appreciate just the raw numbers that we were dealing with. Share screen. The hospitalizations to shut down the province, Eric, if we're in the hundreds. Let me just see this here.
Yeah.
If this was back when? March 1, 2021. This, I believe, was during the first 5-month curfew. 612 hospitalized, and now we know that they weren't distinguishing. 8.5 million people locked down, Eric, because of 600 hospitalized, and we weren't distinguishing the reason for the hospitalization.
Imagine.
I mean, yeah. You say it's going to take 7 to 10 years to make this better. I mean, that's not going to make people feel good.
No, but and that's why that's the reason why the Conservative Party of Quebec is going up, because people realize that. They realize that their business is almost bankrupt because they've shut them down because of the lockdowns. They realize that their kids are on depression because they couldn't do any sports, because they couldn't socialize with their friends for months and months and months. They realize that there's mental issues, problems everywhere now in Quebec. They realize that our debt is now out of control because the government was subsidizing artificially during the crisis. And I could go on and on and on about that list that you know better than me, David. But the reality is that, we've done something. We artificially created a huge crisis that is going to take us years, if not decades, to get out of, because the government decided to intervene way too heavily over the past 2 years. And we have to tell our American friends, Quebec is the worst legislation on the continent on many, many, many matters. It's the Quebec restaurants, for example, that were shut down for the longest of all restaurants in America. We're the only place where the construction industry, for example, was shut down. We're the place where the curfew was the worst of them all. We had the highest tickets, and you have to know, 50,000 Quebecers were given a ticket of $1,500 because the main reason, 50% of them, was because they didn't respect the curfew, because they went out for dinner and they came out at 8:30 instead of 8. And 15,000 Quebecers, almost 1% of the population, got a ticket.
Eric, well, the government's got to raise revenue somehow to pay for this stuff. Those $150 million in COVID ads annually doesn't pay for itself. I guess I'll get into some specific policy questions, but
yeah.
I mean, just explain to Quebecers who probably don't know this, who are the political parties within the province, and what distinguishes the one from the other, if anything?
It's a good question, because I don't have any answer. There's four political parties right now represented at the National Assembly. There's the governing CAQ, la Coalition Avenir Québec, the Coalition for the Future of Quebec, who's led by our Premier François Legault, who used to be a Parti Québécois minister and who became leader of a new coalition because he wasn't getting elected leader of the Parti Québécois. So he founded his own party, and he became premier. The official opposition is the Liberal Party of Quebec, the traditional party in Quebec, who's been there forever, who I have to admit during the crisis, I think they were even worse. They called our vaccine passport the freedom passport at one point of time. They were asking the government to make sure that we could say that we would stay more longer into an emergency crisis, a state of emergency, way longer. They thought that the government didn't have enough power, and so on. The third party is Quebec Solidaire, which is a radical leftist party. Who's also been exactly on the same way, who was the first party, for example, to recommend that we put the mask compulsory. And finally, there's the separatist party Québécois, who is very small right now, who's been well, we didn't hear much about them because they're not very politically significant anymore in Quebec. But that being said, they were also with the government supporting the main measures that were put in place. They were even asking that we shut down the regions to make sure that people couldn't commute between one region and the other before the government did it. And which is fun is that they were all trying to figure out which one would be the worst one to deprive you from your rights and your freedoms. And it was kind of a competition for 2 years to know who's the best one and who's the most radical in its measures. And so I think they've been, the four of them, very successful in going very extreme. But unfortunately for Quebecers, we had to suffer those measures, and we're starting to measure also the impact, the side impacts of all those abusive measures.
Yeah, so, I love it. People in the chat, you gotta love it. It's Orwellian. It's like call it the exact opposite of what it is. The freedom passport. It's like, yeah, work will set you free. And they literally did call it. By the way, they said the vaccine is the passport to freedom. At one point, I won't pull that tweet up. It might be too hyperbolic. But I mean, okay. I'm going to ask you this question. I voted for Legault back when was the last election? It was before COVID.
2018. Me too. Believe it or not, David. We call in French, we say cacu. I don't know how to translate that, but you know, when your wife is cheating on you, and that's how we feel as CAC voters.
It's amazing. Like I voted, not only never again, I have a good mind to buy the biggest billboard on earth that we can find in Quebec and say François Legault is a dictator. I call him supreme leader. I call them the sunset thief after 5 months of curfew. But we voted. I didn't know that you voted for him, and I didn't mean to. I would never have asked, but just say I voted for him. Some of the policies, I don't mind a more autonomous Quebec. I'm not anti-separatist. I wouldn't vote for it, but I understand the sentiment. But in the beginning of COVID, he was reasonable. He said like, okay, let's not overreact. And then it was like either he got, I don't want to get conspiratorial. He either got a call from above, or he just said, I like this power, like Lord of the Rings, and he went nuts.
Yeah, but there's another problem as well. I think he also watched the polls, and that's where I was disappointed of Quebecers, because we saw a lot of people who felt secure, and we're going to have to learn from what we've been through and make sure that we understand how important and precious are our liberties. And how, when the government is saying that he's going to take a little bit of your liberties in exchange of more security for you and your family, you have to be very, very cautious, because we ended up with neither. We have the worst. We have to look at the record of Quebec. We have the worst record in Canada right now in terms of death per population. We have to remind them. We even if we had the worst measures, the most coercive measures of them all in America, not just in Canada, we still have more deaths per capita than anywhere else in the country. And that says a lot. If those measures were at least working, at least we could have something to celebrate and say, well, at least we saved lives. Well, no, that's not what when we look at the figures, that's not what we see. So we have to learn a lesson. And I think a lot of people did. A lot of people are joining the Conservative Party, David, who used to be on the separatist side or on the leftist side, or we were political opponents until this crisis. And now we're all united together because many of us have realized that, no matter left, right, separatist, federalist, we don't care. We just want to make sure we protect our freedoms. And that's what the Conservative Party is going to stand for in the upcoming election.
Well, I mean, look, I'm not saying I know who I'm not voting for. I think I might know who I am
Or
voting for.
re-voting for, you should say.
Oh, sure. Never. I want to take back my vote. In fact, I want to work. I want to work to undo my vote
I want to be
retroactively.
reimbursed.
But now, so let me add the topic of the day. There's two actually concrete policy decisions, policy issues. First is Bill 96. So that, and for anybody watching who doesn't know, Bill 96. So I talked about it in the beginning part of the stream today, 4 hours ago. Bill 96 is revamping Bill 101. It's Bill 101 2.0, language laws, more restrictions, more limitations on education, more impositions of French requirements on small businesses for a law that's been around for 40 years and has arguably not achieved its objective, probably because you can't preserve identity via law. But set that aside. What's the Conservative Party's take? Are they trying to get the Anglo vote, or? And I'll ask you if you've been consistent in your position, but what is the position on Bill 96?
2 or 3 things I want to say about that. First off, I want to become Premier of Quebec. People have to understand that it's the most important political position for the Francophones in North America. When you become Premier of Quebec, your duty, I believe, is not just to manage properly your province like anywhere else in the country or your state down south. It's also that you're the political head of the Francophones of America, and you have a duty to promote and protect that language because it's fragile, and yes, we're in a minority situation. That being said, Bill 96 we were the first party to came up against it, even way before the Liberals. Actually, the Liberals were in favor of it and thought they didn't go far enough, and they started amending it until it backfired. But we were against it from day one, David, because there's an article at the beginning of the bill that says that they want to subtract that bill from 38 articles of the Charter of Rights and Freedom, the Quebec Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And that for us, after what we've been through over the last 2 years, adopting a bill that is going to deprive us from even more rights and more freedoms, no matter on which issue it is. It's just like what we've been through. We realize that our charters are much more important than our government's willingness to change things. And so for me, that was a no-go upfront. So there's no way, and it's not just for Anglophones, it's for anyone. We shouldn't adopt a bill that, if we're violating your rights and freedoms, you should at least have the right to go in front of the courts and challenge that bill.
And Eric, that is, they were trying to protect it from, or specify it's going to violate charter rights. That's under the notwithstanding clause of the Constitution, correct?
Yeah, exactly.
And we've talked about it, but just to refresh everybody's memory, there is Section 33 of the Charter of Rights, which specifically says the provinces can enact laws that specifically violate charter rights for a maximum of 5 years if it's specifically stipulated in the law. The idea being that if you realize you've elected a fascist dictator, they shouldn't be able to stay in power forever. Next election, you vote out the fascist dictator who doesn't mind enacting laws that violate your charter rights.
But David, it's important what you just said. I'm in favor of that, because it's okay if there is reasons why politicians sometimes need to violate the charter, but at least you do it after the courts have made a decision where people can have access to it. And politically, you have to pay the price, because you have to explain why you're doing it and why you're violating rights and freedoms in your province. But what we're doing by adopting Bill 96 is saying we're never going to know if it passes the test of the charter, and the government never will have to explain that they're depriving you from your rights and freedoms. So that's why I'm scared of that bill, actually.
Well, I've been saying this to the Anglo population. It's not popular, but too late to complain about Legault violating your language laws, your language rights. Sorry, when he spent the last 2.5 years violating every one of your rights. So you didn't mind, Anglo community, when they masked up your children, when they implemented this vaccine passport, when they shut down schools, when they shut down businesses, when they locked you in your homes. You didn't mind, violation of your rights there. Too bad, so sad. Now you want to come out and say he's violating my language rights. It's good to know where you stand on it. I can support some of the measures, but I just ultimately think now, 40 years later, if you're not winning this cultural struggle for existence through legislation, that's not how you're going to win it. And I think what makes Quebec unique, and what has, what's spread across the world in terms of Quebec cultural identity, has not done so because of legislation. It's done so because of its quality of filmmaking, music, I dare say food to some extent, tourism, culture.
But not politicians, David.
No, all of it now, except now I know everyone who I know says Montreal used to be a nice place, never coming to that communist hellhole ever again. Eric, well, let's do one policy specific legislation. Bill 15, removal of parental supremacy as the guiding factor from the Youth Protection Act. What's the Conservative Party's position on that?
Well, we're against it, obviously, because we do believe that the parents are the best place to have the interest of their kids at heart. And I told you at the beginning, I'm a libertarian. For me, individual freedom is important, and I don't like the nanny state coming into your family and saying they're going to protect your kids. Again, it's the same dilemma. We're always talking about the same thing, depending on which issue. It's just changing the issue, but it's always the thing that should parents give more of their freedom to the government so that it secures the kids? That's the nice speech that is given to explain and to justify such policies. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way when in the reality when it's implemented, and that's what I'm scared of. It looks good to say, oh, we're protecting the kids. Who could be against the protection of kids? But unfortunately, we saw just disasters one after the other in Quebec with bureaucrats using their power, abusing their power, I should say, and destroying families and individuals and human beings. And for me, that's unacceptable. So we're going to be against Bill 15, obviously.
Now it's passed into law now.
It just passed a few 2 weeks ago.
So is part of the platform going to be repealing Bill 15?
Yes, but the electoral platform, honestly, David, is not unlike the other parties. We're not going to have a platform with 200 points. We're going to have a platform with 4 or 5 issues that we're going to talk during the election campaign. Very simple, that we're going to explain to every single door in Quebec, and that's what we're going to do. Yes, we're going to talk about that, and yes, we're going to repeal that. But the platform, as we usually know it, we're going to diminish it and downsize it to the maximum, so we can explain it to every single door. And it's going to be 4 or 5 issues that we're going to repeat every single day of the campaign.
A question for my own personal edification: how does it work geographically? Do you have a full slate for the next upcoming election, and does it go by ridings in the same way the federal does?
There's 125 constituencies in Quebec. Out of those, I think I've already announced publicly like 1/5 or 1/4 of them. We still have more candidates that we need to announce. The election is only in 5 months, I have to remind you. And but we still have, we're still looking for good candidates. So if some people are interested, raise your hand. We're going to have a candidate in every single constituency. We already know that, and obviously the Conservative Party of Quebec is more popular and more well known in Quebec City. You have to understand
that's weird. I found surprising.
Quebec City is the stronghold of conservatism in Quebec. It's been for a long time. It is federally. We're the only region where there's a lot of conservative members of parliament in Ottawa. In the old days of the ADQ with Mario Dumont, which was another center-right party, it was more in Quebec City that we're more popular. I've been a radio host in this city for over 10 years, so I'm much more well-known here and more popular in Quebec City. And if you look at the polls right now, it's like 2 to 1. Like we're 2 times more popular in Quebec City than our figures nationally. While in Montreal, it's the opposite. You have to divide by 2 our support when in terms of percentage. So our real challenge is to try to move on and move west from Quebec City. And why do you find it weird that it's in Quebec City that we're the most popular?
I just would have figured that the CAQ would have been more popular in Quebec City just based on I guess language laws and to some extent the COVID measures. I mean, Quebec is a smaller city, and it's sort of more isolated and likes that from the rest of the province.
And more francophone also, eh? It's very francophone. But you're right. The CAQ was more popular here. But go back to the 1980 or even 1995 referendum. Actually, if the no side won barely in Quebec in 1995, it's because the francophones in Quebec City voted much more no than the francophones elsewhere in Quebec, especially those in Montreal. And also the places where we're doing the best are the places where the CAC used to do the best, because our main supporters are coming from the CAC. The CAC voters, yes, they have the same number currently if you look at the polls that they had in the last election, but their voters have completely changed. The average age of the CAC voter has probably increased by like something like 10 to 15 years. The CAC voter right now, just to give you an idea, roughly, I don't want to go into too much figures, but the 18 to 35 years old, it's the Conservatives and Quebec Solidaire, the leftist party, that are competing against each other. 35 to 55, it's the Conservatives against the CAC, and then 65 and over, it's the CAC alone. It's like 57%. I think we're at 5 or 6% among those people. So the CAC voters are very, very old, and it's normal because they've been scaring people off, and the COVID was attacking more the elderly people, and that's where the CAC got all their support. And it's all, when I was telling you earlier, you said who called them and who controlled them, and I think it was the polls. They saw a bunch of voters who were scared, and they tried to be the nanny state to protect them and get their political support. And for now, it did work. I think that was the strategy, and that explains a lot of the moves that have been done by François Legault over the last 2 years.
It's I wasn't suspicious about I didn't put two and two together, but François Legault tweeted out a while back, having read The Fourth Industrial Revolution by Klaus Schwab, which I thought in retrospect was funny now, given what people are saying. But I mean, here's a question. We'll get to immigration before we forget. But so you're relatively certain to get at least some seats in the next election. Currently, no seats in the National
Currently, we have one seat. We have Claire Sanson, the MNA, the member of the National Assembly from the constituency of Iberville. She was elected as a CAC member, and she crossed over on June of last year, so almost a year ago. And that's how we ended up having a seat. And it's very important to have a seat at the National Assembly for me, because that gives me the right. Like for this morning, for example, I was meeting the business leaders, like the Conseil du Patronat and the boards of trades and the Federation of taxpayers, not of taxpayers, of small businesses and exporters of Quebec, and all those people, because I could have a room at the National Assembly, I could have a mic, I could do my press conferences at the National Assembly. So strategically, for us to become a great party, we needed a seat at the National Assembly. Unfortunately, we got one.
Well, let me bring this up just so that no one thinks that I'm making stuff up. This is a tweet from François Legault, people.
No, it's true. He did that.
Admittedly, it's from 2017, but it's bizarre. It's just bizarre. What's the Conservatives' take on immigration to Quebec?
Well, immigration is a huge issue because, as you know, our population is aging in Quebec right now. We have a shortage of manpower. I'm a fiscal conservative. I always thought that the first way to better integrate immigrants in Quebec is to make sure that they have a good job. Then it's a success for them and for Quebec. And currently, there is a shortage of jobs, so we need immigrants, obviously. The number of immigrants per year is always a huge issue in Quebec because of language issues. As you know, Montreal has a huge power of attraction of immigrants. A lot of them, the percentage of immigrants that go towards English instead of French is higher than the percentage of the French population in Quebec versus Anglophones. So there's a huge conflict, and we need to solve that. And that's something, David, that we need people like you to solve, because the Anglophones have a huge role to play in Quebec on that. We need to make sure that, we stop those feuds of the past. We stop looking at Quebec between if we're French or English. We have to start realizing that we are lucky that anyone in Quebec could learn both languages, could practice it on a daily basis, that companies could come to Montreal and have a completely educated bilingual population, the only place in America where you can find so many. And we should see it as a richness, but unfortunately for decades, we've seen it as a battlefield, and it needs to stop. We need to work together, and it's working at a certain extent, in the sense that young Anglophones in Quebec have never been as bilingual, and even Francophones have never been as bilingual as we are right now. And we should encourage more Anglophones to do like you did and go to the cégep or university in French. That's something I would do as premier, to make sure, and it would reconfort Francophones. They would, the threats will stop being there. And that's one of the things I want to do if I become premier of Quebec, is to make sure that we lose the fact that we're scared of disappearing as Francophones in America. And I know that people say, oh, it's just the language, but and I understand it, because I feel it as an individual. We're part of a small minority. We think we have a contribution in America as Francophones, and we want to make sure that we preserve that and we transfer that to the next generation. And that sentiment is there, it's strong, and we need to make sure that we're all working and we all understand it. Which doesn't mean, and that's where my libertarian side kicks in, we also have to respect rights of everybody, and we have to make sure that we're not using the coercion of the state to implement those things. We could encourage people, we could say it, but we cannot use the power of the state to deprive people from their freedom to promote language. That's another difference between me and the rest of the nationalist movement in Quebec.
Well, that's the biggest, I guess my biggest question is, look, I've set a few lines in the sand that I said, if and when they get crossed, I'm going to contemplate my future in this province and country. And unfortunately, one of them was Bill 15. Here's the question. You get elected, you get into power. What do you do to ensure that no government going forward can ever do what the current government just did to us over the last 2 years?
The first thing we need to do, and I've said it over and over again, the first bill we're going to table is to amend the Public Health Act. That's the act that was used to impose the state of emergency for 2 years. We've even tabled a bill right now that is in front of the National Assembly, Bill 898. It was tabled by our only member, Claire Sanson, to amend that bill, to make sure that you cannot do what they've done, that you need debates every single month at the National Assembly. Every single member needs to stand up and say, yes, I want to renew the act, the state of emergency. Just to force, because now people have even forgotten that we've been under that for two years and a few months, because nobody's even talking about it anymore, because it's like we think that it's normal to live in a state of emergency, which is not. So that's the first thing of them all that I would do, is to adopt the amendment to the Public Health Act.
Okay, it's good. That might not be far enough for me, but I don't think we can.
No, it's not far enough for me either. But at least we need to start somewhere. And the worst of them all is that one. They were using public health as a measure, as a weapon to deprive us from, to bypass everything. And that we need to fix the hole in the law that is there right now, because you know that the law is not crystal clear. They've been interpreting some articles of the law, but it's not clear if they can, after a month, they could still renew it. They've interpreted it in their own favor, but even the bill as written currently is not crystal clear.
No, and I say, like, I interviewed Brian Peckford, and he explained quite, eloquently why I say amend the charter to either remove the notwithstanding clause or amend the first provision, which says sets a threshold for violating laws. But he says, first of all, you can't just open up that box and just tinker with one little item, renegotiate the whole thing, and that would be a constitutional crisis. So, yeah, amending either the Quarantine Act, which is not in the Constitution, or those public health laws that they've been using to justify abrogating the legislative process would be a start.
But David, hold on. There's a larger problem here. Because we're trying to think about every laws we can amend and all the framework that we need to put in place. But the problem is that for 2 years, they've put that completely aside, and they've violated every single thing that were put in place just to make sure that those things don't happen. All the barriers that we had legally have all been violated, one after the other, after the other, after the other. And so even if we put more barriers in the future, my problem is that if we still elect a guy like Legault, he's going to go all over again. And what's going to happen after October 3rd, you think, if he gets reelected? Is he going to come back with another curfew? Is he going to come back with another lockdown? There's going to be a 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, call it whatever you want, wave. Is he going to come back with the passport, the vaccine passport? Because he told us not to delete the app in our cell phone because he said it might be useful in the fall. So what's going to happen if he's reelected? Are we going to go all over this again and again and again?
Well,
That's my
I'll say
concern.
the answer is going to be yes, because he, like Trudeau, even if he gets elected with this, a lesser mandate, he's gonna say, it's a mandate. You've ratified everything I've done for the last 2.5 years. What's his face? Trudeau, sorry, says, even though I get elected with a minority, it confirms my mandate. I mean, Legault's going to do the same thing and say, you liked it so much the first time, and the second time,
I'm going to give you even more.
you govern me harder, daddy. There's a meme on the internet, but someone says, I don't know what this means, but hope you can finally put an end to the quiet loony revolution lumbering along as it is, and Quebec get back to sanity. Well, hopefully that. There was a question specifically for you. They always say what we want to hear, but once in power, they forget their promises and the people that put them there. So who are you, Eric?
It's a very good question, and I have the same concern with all the politicians. And I understand that, there's the bureaucracy behind that. You always have a pressure when you're elected. And I think the only way that I could deliver on what I'm saying and stay the same way as I am right now is if I have the support of the people, because ultimately that's what matters. If I arrive in power and I'm elected with 40% or 35 or 32% of the votes, and there's protests in front of my office every day, and people who supporting me are not quite sure and are not quite, they were not quite confident, it's going to be very, very tough. But if I have a strong support, it's going to be very easy to go the other way around and say, look, I'm sorry, I don't care. This is what we got elected for, and this is what we're going to do. And even in caucus, it's going to be easier. And even with bureaucrats, it's going to be easier. So I think that, yes, the politicians are to blame, but the fact that we're not, after them for our issues is also to blame. They have to feel the pressure. I need to feel your pressure, David, if I'm elected, that you tell me, Eric, look, this is what why we voted for you, and we're going to kick you out if you don't behave the way you told us so. But currently, the government didn't feel enough pressure during the crisis. It was one of the problems.
They liked it. When you buy off the media, you get CJAD to spout your talking points, to encourage your fear. You get people to want the abuse. And I think Legault did his $150 million a year on COVID ads, fear porn. It did the job.
He didn't pay the opposition, and they were all lined up to lick him. This is what happened. There's something wrong. I mean, why didn't we have any opposition officially in this province? How come it's me, a radio host, who has to resign and has to start a party from almost scratch, who stands up for that? There should have been thousands like me who stood up. Where were the activists, the legal activists or the human rights activists or the civic rights activists? Where were they?
Yeah, they weren't saying anything. But the second you touch English language laws, then the school boards start protesting.
They're screaming their heads off.
One person asked, do you support the pipeline? I think I'm going to know your answer.
Yes, I do indeed. I do. Not only do I support the pipeline, but I think that we need to. I was also the gas line as well. As you know, there's I think in English you say LNG, liquid natural gas project, $14 billion investment in the Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean region. Currently, we would be a great support to our allies in Europe if that project went ahead. As I said earlier, I want us to become independent in terms of gas and oil. We have huge resources in Quebec. There's no reason why I should import it from legislations where the environmental rules are as good or even worse than ours, and why we should send those jobs elsewhere instead of here. I do believe in our local gas and oil industry, and I will support them if I'm elected.
All right, man. Eric, is there anything you want to say that I haven't asked you?
I want to talk about abortion, because it's been the issue of the day, David. You might not know, but yesterday I got bashed at the National Assembly, and it's going to interest those Americans who are watching us, because of the debates that are going on down south. There's politicians here who think they're, I guess, the 51st state, or I don't know, but they've decided that it was the debate of the day and the issue of the moment. So they started bashing me because I have one candidate, Roy Epen, who's running in NDG in Montreal. He's a physician at St. Mary's Hospital, assistant professor at McGill, an endocrinologist. Do we say that that way in English?
And
Yeah,
endocrinologist. I think that's right. Yeah,
yeah.
that's right.
And he's running for us. And Roy, in his personal fate, is pro-life, and he wrote it on his blog in 2015. And I knew that for years. I've known Roy for 2 decades. He's been a good friend, and I always respected him, even if on social issues we're not exactly at the same place. But that being said, when he decided to run, I said, "Look, Roy, me personally, I'm gay, I'm pro-choice, and the party's not going to go there. And anyway, it's a federal jurisdiction, so it's not of interest." But he came out, and we said it during the press conference when he announced his candidacy in NDG 2 months ago. And now the other parties came after me yesterday. François Legault, the Premier of Quebec, the leader of the opposition, Dominique Anglade, and the radical left party leader, Gabriel Nadeau-Dubois, saying that I have to kick him out of my party, that we shouldn't tolerate a candidate who is, in his personal faith, is pro-life. And I find that there's a link between all of what we've discussed right now. Is that there seems to be no freedom of choice possible anymore with those people. It's you believe like we do, or otherwise we're going to eliminate you. It's the cancel culture again at its worst. And I have a huge problem with that. Even if I'm profoundly pro-choice, I'm going to defend pro-lifers because they have a right to say what they do. And in democracy, you have to express your views. And I find it way worse if we deprive them from their rights. And if I have candidates that I meet and tell me, yes, Eric, I'm pro-choice, because they can't say they're pro-life, and then I nominate one the education minister and another one health minister, and they're starting to doing weird things, at least if I know, I could look and I could make sure that we're going the right way. A hidden agenda is always worse than a transparency agenda. And right now, what's going on with that hunt?
I just say it's so stupid because it's not going to be a provincial issue anyhow.
No,
So
anyway.
it's just purely attacking someone for their personal belief. But I would ask those who are asking you to kick him out, until when do they tolerate abortion? Do they support third trimester abortions? Do they support post birth abortions like Norfolk in Virginia has suggested? Put them on the spot. When do they draw the line? And if they draw the line at second trimester, well, they're just as much pro-life in a way as other people. They should get canceled too. I'd like to know what their positions are. I'd like to know if they want to authorize abortion in third trimesters.
And the other problem I have with that, David, is that you know that a lot of ethnic communities, the newly arrived one in Montreal, sometimes they're much more conservative than we are socially. They're much more religious than we are. Does that mean that we have to eliminate them democratically from parliament and right to vote or right to run? It's very scary when you start to manage a society that way. And the other paradox also is that now they're saying, oh, it's very important, the freedom of choice for women. Where were they 3 months ago when they wanted to kick out all the nurses who were not vaccinated? My body, my choice didn't matter at that point. They were. It's complete hypocrisy and double standard, I find. Don't you think?
Anyone watching now knows I've been railing against Trudeau. Oh, a woman's choice for her own medical conditions is her right, unless I tell them to get vaccinated. Oh, the most tolerant parties on earth, they don't support discrimination, but they impose vaccine passports that have a disparate impact on Blacks, Latinos, Indigenous, and women. I mean, they have no principles. But how do you have to make other people realize that? And if that's my purpose on this earth. I hope I'm doing a good job of it.
But Legault personally was even worse than Trudeau on that. He even came out publicly a few months ago saying that he would refuse to be treated by a nurse who was not vaccinated. He wouldn't. I mean, the guy would rather die without any health care than having a nurse who's not vaccinated. Like, it was that crazy. And today he's trying to give us some lessons about how respectful he is of the women and how my body, my choice is so important. And he's pro-choice. My God, what a flip-flop.
Well, I got to tell you something, Eric, so everybody knows, I met you for the first time 2 nights ago.
In French, we were in French 2 nights ago.
Yeah, so I was in French 2 nights ago. I invited everybody, and I think they might have, those who don't speak French probably stayed for a shorter period of time. I like you.
Thank you so much. You're nice, David.
I didn't know the answers to any of these questions. And I've got to say, I think I can safely say that I would vote Conservative provincially because I don't feel like I'd be cheating on the PPC federally. Hold on, I'm going to put this back on pause. But how do I pause this? Sorry. the trial has resumed, Eric, where can people find you and how can people support you?
Well, you can go to conservative.quebec or conservateur.quebec if you want to become a member or donate. If you want to donate, you have to be a voter in Quebec. If you want to become a member, you have to be a Canadian citizen of 14 years old and older. And you can have all the, our website is bilingual. You'll find all the literature that you need if you want to know more about the party. If you want to communicate with us, you're more than welcome in the Quebec Conservative family.
Amazing. Eric, thank you very much. This was
Thank
fantastic.
you very much, David.
My pleasure. We'll do it again. I mean, we'll do it again when issues come up.
Merci beaucoup, David.
Right.
Au revoir.
Bye.
Bye.
All right, people. I hope you found that enlightening. We talked about the important stuff. I actually did not know any of the answers to all of those questions that I was asking Eric, and his answers align with my views because I think they're right, reasonable, justifiable, and I dare say constitutional and coherent. And anybody watching, if you clip and snip any portion of that and share it far and wide so that Quebecers can understand there is an option to this tyranny, because it's not just François Legault, who is a remorseless tyrant. Each and every one of those other, Parti Québécois, Parti Libéral de Québec, they're equally as bad. They're just sitting there. His expression was, I think it's licking the boot. I think he was trying to do a direct translation. They're just waiting for their day so they can use these abusive overreach to get into power and to keep power. So there's an option out there, people. I did not know of this option until recently, and I'm glad I asked those questions because Eric doesn't give the right answers. He gives the right answers. Let's think about that. Now, back to the brain rot, people.